Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Hello and welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. On this episode, I'm speaking to an artist with a unique creative talent. As you'll hear, I met her at an event I was speaking at and was blown away by what she does and how she sees the world, so I naturally had to get her onto the show. Her name is Hannah Williams, and she's the founder of a company called Scribble Inc. Hannah's talent is in something called livescribing, where she's able to summarise presentations and discussions into beautiful pieces of art that fuse words and images. Now, I know what you're thinking. An audio podcast is a very strange choice of format for exploring an artist and her work, but just bear with me, because I think Hannah's work is that much more remarkable to look at once you've heard how she does it and the constraints she works under. Now, if you can't resist a sneak peek, there are links to some of Hannah's works in the show notes, including the artwork she produced of a presentation I did at an event called Speak to the Human earlier this year. You can find out more about that event in the show notes as well. The reason I wanted to get Hannah onto the show is because she has some fascinating perspectives from having spent hours observing humans and summarising their thoughts and ideas. The lens that she puts onto people has much to teach us about human risk. I also think that her experience of setting up an unconventional business that deploys her unique talents is well worth hearing about. In our discussion, we explore Hannah's story and her successful transition from being an artist to running a full-time business. She explains what livescribing is and the processes she uses to capture content. Hannah talks about the importance of constraints in boosting creativity, explaining how controlled environments and restrictions can actually stimulate creative flow. And she discusses the power of drawing as a means of communication and self-expression, and how her work helps people articulate their feelings, thoughts, and emotions. We also spend some time exploring the principles that underpin her business and how she manages to align business decisions with her personal values. Finally, we look at how visualizing information and drawing can aid memory retention, and why those of us with fewer artistic talents shouldn't be afraid of picking up a pen or pencil, just seeing what happens. This was one of those episodes that made me think while we were recording it, and even more so afterwards. So please enjoy my discussion with Hannah Williams on the art of livescribing. Hannah, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you, Christian. It's so lovely to be here.
I'm so excited to have you here because we met at an event, which was a fabulous thing, and you started talking about what you were doing, and I saw what you did at the end of the event, that you produced something incredible. So tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll talk about what it is you do.
Thank you. I'm so pleased to be here. It's so lovely getting to chat about something that is quite niche and ironically visual, which probably doesn't help a podcast. So you'll just have to go and have a look at what I do. And also that intro, I love that I could have sat anywhere in that event, and I happened to sit next to possibly the person with the coolest backstory I've ever heard. And we just chatted and chatted and chatted. So I'm, so excited to be here. And as a background, I suppose, I am an illustrator by training. I am a visualizer of information is possibly the most broadest way of describing it. And its official term is live scribing. So think of the term scribing, ye olde scribe, take notes at a meeting. But add in, for me, that it's visual, it's live, I'm drawing as someone speaks. And at the end of the event, I capture the entire essence of the day on a page. So rather than scraps of notes and trying to remember what you've just seen, you've got a visual that's got everything right there on the page and just a beautiful capture, really, of what's happened.
As you say, it is slightly ironic. This is audio only, but we will put links up to your website. It sounds really simple the way you describe it, which is you're there while people are presenting. And this event that you and I were at, is I was one of a number of presenters. And so you start with a blank canvas, literally at the back of the room, and then you're painting something that's a combination of art and notes. And it's much more emphasis on the art, but there are words and images there. And the bit that I find amazing is it's not like you are writing down something you know is coming. You know, you're not documenting a play you've read before. It's unfolding in front of you.
No idea.
And so you're having to react in the moment. You can talk to speakers before about what they're going to say. You have a rough idea, but you're really having to fill this canvas as you go. And that's the bit that fascinates me, which is it's really in the moment. you have to take the materials you're given by the presenters and then you have to work with that. So that strikes me as being really hard.
Correct. And it's actually something that's kind of encapsulated in the name of the business, which is Scribble Inc. and not INK, which would make way more sense. It's INC. And it really was because of this idea of incorporating visuals and words together to help connect people and ideas. And I really like the idea that it's not just about making things pretty. It's not just surface level. It's how do we connect on a deeper level? How do we make information more accessible? How do we invite people into a conversation? And that really was what incorporate meant to me at the time. And you're right, I don't know what people are going to say, but as good practice, good cleanly practice of business, I always have a conversation with my client first. So with Actian as the example, the brilliant Sarah, who is the organizer of that event, I need to shout her out because she's one of the most lovely people I've ever worked with. We have chat, even though we've worked together 3 years in a row, and we always have a chat and we always get clear what the purpose is going to be for the event. Why are people coming together? What's my role? What am I capturing when I'm there? And also, what's the outcome? So what are people walking away with? Not just in the moment, what's the purpose coming together? What are we taking away? And that gives me, I suppose, a context of what I'm capturing. It's almost like a lens, because if you try and capture every single conversation and every single talk, I don't even think the tapestry of life is big enough for that, because Christian is a brilliant talker and will tell you everything. He will tell you life as it is. So I use that conversation as context to look through the event, and I start to see where those spaces and people and conversations are aligning. And if I know, so for acting as the example, coming back to it, the theme was human connection. And I know then what I'm looking for within those 8 hours of every conversation, every interaction. I know that if it comes back to that, I'm on the right line. And that's going to make for a coherent piece. And that's going to mean it's valuable to everyone in the room. And then they can use it. They can share it on socials. They could print it and have it on their desk. They could have it on the wall. And it's just something that you align with. And if you align with it, you remember it. So that's really the essence of it is getting clear. What's the purpose? How do I help?
And how did you get into this? Because clearly, you've worked out, you've got a talent for art. How does one move from that? And I'm guessing this became apparent at a relatively young age, as you're allowed to play with these things. How did you move from that into this? Because the funny thing about it is it's so, once you've seen it and seen you in action, I just go, wow, that's really cool. And I totally see the value in it and I get it, but it's not an obvious career path. And so how did you morph from that I'm good at drawing into doing what you've just described?
It's a really good question. And no, I didn't start going, Mum, I want to draw.
I'm just going to note down the family dinner conversation. Right. We're going to.
Oh God. Yeah. So to be honest, it's actually the coolest thing I've ever done. I think my claim to fame really is that at 9 months old, I was holding a pencil properly, and my mum swears this. And I don't think it's her just trying to be a proud mum. And when she tries to explain to people what I do, it's, well, she hold a pencil at night. Could you what? I don't think it's that, actually. But you're right. I have always drawn. I've always, I suppose, experienced life through drawing. So, and what I mean by that is I find aspects of life quite overwhelming, especially making decisions, unpacking big ideas that sit in my head. And one of the ways that I've taught myself really, it's been through family sort of showing me how to draw and art classes, but for my own practice, it helped me take the weight out of my head and onto paper so I can actually look at it from a different perspective. And as a child, I'd draw scenarios that are happening that I just couldn't quite understand because it was adults talking about something. And I thought, I don't really know what that means. I'm going to draw it and maybe it'll make sense at some point. And that followed me all the way through school. I was drawing my classes so that I could try and keep up because I went to quite a competitive grammar school, and I was aggressively average. I will have that on record. Aggressively. Very middle, so not good enough to be awarded, not bad enough to need extra support or attention. So I just kind of sailed through. But to keep myself sane, I drew every class, and it was the information, the teachers, the intonation of what they were saying, what other people had suggested in class. And I found that if I could draw it, I could remember it, and it helped with my revision. It helped me speed up processes of trying to learn for exams. And then that all led into me studying illustration at university. And coming back to that idea of overwhelm, well, I'm a country bumpkin going to Manchester. It was the biggest sensory overload of my life. The people, the city, the sounds, the university expectation of this is uni. This is where you start to explore and adventure and find out who you are. And all those themes are so big and they sat so heavily in my head that I found I'd draw through my lectures, and I'd, in essence, do what I do now, but a very primitive version, which I call sketch notes. In my sketchbook, I'd sort of capture the seminar or the lecture on a page, and my lecturers would come up to me at the end and go, we didn't give you the presentation. How do you know? Are you cheating? How are you finding this out? And I look at them with the same sort of disdain of, why can't you do it? You're 30 years ahead in your career. You're an illustrator far more than I am. Why can't you draw at the same time as someone speaks? And that is so arrogant. And I know that now. But it's so intrinsic in how I learn. I couldn't possibly understand someone didn't do it with more skills than I had. And that's when we realised, between us, my lecturers and me, that this was a pretty niche skill that I'd been developing and growing from the age of about 4.
It's fascinating because, and I love that sort of, why can't you do this? Because I think that speaks to the human condition. We struggle to sometimes see things that other people have difficulties with.
Yes.
So if you're good at sport, coordinated, good at those, so you struggle to see why people can't do that. If you're good at languages. And so what you've just talked about is, it doesn't matter what the skill set is. And I love this idea that we all have superpowers in some, we just have to find them.
Yes.
And in your case, it was just unlocked. But this idea that you're sort of like bewildered by what on the face of it is, I mean, I'm sort of being very facetious. There's this kind of like, people, can you, there's this expression about walking and chewing gum at the same time, right? So you're combining quite a lot of things because what you're doing there is you're taking things in, processing it, and then producing something beautiful. And so the bit that I find interesting is when I look at this, I mean, I'm terrible at art. And the reason I think I really have huge amounts of respect for what you do is I struggle. If I'm having to listen to someone, I'm trying to make sense of the idea that I can make sense of that and then put it down is quite complicated. So I could understand it on a sort of basic level if you were kind of taking some notes down, and in my head that's traditional notes,
Yeah.
and then afterwards you were kind of drawing this beautiful thing. But you're doing both of those things at once. But to you, well, that's obvious, right? Because you're in the flow, and that's your way of taking notes. So what I think of as two processes is probably for you one, right?
You actually nailed it there. It's flow. It's all about flow. I've had sessions where I've not felt engaged. It's very, very rare for me because I love what I do and I love my clients. But if there's one that comes to mind where I didn't necessarily align with their values and thought it would just be interesting to get an insight to what they did, like behind the curtains, as context. It's an organization where we all use it within our homes to light things and power things.
Right.
Not aligned with my values, but I really wanted to see, and I use my business actually as that sort of, I must come and work with you so I can get an idea of what's going on. And then afterwards I can go, here are the facts why we don't get on. So anyway, as that, a prime example where there was no flow and it was arduous. I had to battle to try and understand and appreciate. I think part of what I do is appreciating that someone has gone to the lengths to create a talk, to hone and combine and collaborate and build all of their knowledge and experience into 20 minutes of talking. The last thing, for me, it's a privilege to listen to that. And if I can convert their energy into a different form, so taking the spoken word and creating a tangible reflection of that, that's such a privilege for me. And I know I've gone off topic of what you were saying, but there is a study actually. This is really interesting. It's a company based in the USA called B2B Decision Labs. And they actually study the efficacy of drawing along. So, like you say, taking notes. But if you can draw along, the power of movement and memory. So if you're someone that takes notes on your laptop, that's okay. But if you find that you struggle to remember what's going on or what happened, try using a physical pen and a notebook, because they found that that movement, the connection, helps us sort of contain the knowledge within our system, specifically the dexterity in our fingers. So if you're using your fingers to write, and reading up on that made so much sense because it was after I read their work, and I thought, oh my God, that's exactly what I was doing in school. I can't remember where I was going with that.
That's perfect. No, Dan, do not worry about like diving into rabbit holes. That's exactly what the show's all about.
This is my brain.
But I love this idea, and I'd never thought about it, of taking someone's energy that they've put out there and transforming it. And I love that because when you talk about it in those terms, it feels like a very natural flow.
Yes.
And of course, we know that in the world has a finite set of resources, and that plays into our perspectives on climate and sustainability and everything else. But I love this idea of taking someone's energy and transforming it into something else, because I think that beautifully summarizes it. I'd never thought about, I guess, the output being immediately visual. When I do a presentation to people, I want to get into their heads, and then something goes on inside their brains, and maybe they'll say something immediately to me. But I hadn't thought about that energy transfer point that you make. And I think that's really powerful.
Yes.
Because then you become a conduit for, if we looked at it as electricity, as energy, it's flowing into your ears and eyes, I guess, and then down onto your hands and onto the paper.
Yes.
And I think that's a beautiful way to look at it. And I think, again, points to the natural nature of it.
I think so. Thank you, because that's a beautiful way of summarizing it. And actually, it's only through conversations like this, like what we have happening right now, where you start to perspective shift on what you do yourself. So almost recognizing it in other places and understanding how you see it and how other people see it. Gosh, that's the most exciting thing, when someone goes, oh, actually, I would use it like this. I feel I would never have thought of that, because my application and their application might be totally different. But actually going back to your idea of the sort of synthesizing at the same time, I'd love to say it was magic. I'd love to claim that. I think the logical, which I often bring things back to logical, I don't know why, it's not very artist of me, is practice. So it's this simultaneous being interested, being present, being curious, and then being practiced. So my arm, when I hear let's, for example, say, we're focusing on a person-centered approach, a human-centered approach this year. I've heard this before, maybe not that sentence, but that idea. My brain sees it immediately as a visual. It kind of floats just outside and just above my head. And then it's up to my arm, from muscle memory of drawing something similar, to draw it as quickly as I can. What's funny is that I can shut off the conscious part, the part that needs to tell it. So, when you're trying to draw something that you've never seen before and you have to keep looking at it and going back and looking, I very rarely have to do that, because I've practiced so many times drawing so many things from so many angles in so many pens, that my arm just gets to work. So I can use more percentage of my brain in actively listening, because I'm not diverting as much consciousness to the arm. Now, I don't know how this is scientifically accurate, but this is my experience. And the other part to that is being prepared. So if I know I'm working with a client and their color scheme is orange and purple, I have orange and purple pens in only so many sizes. So there's less decision making happening. It's everything is ready. And it's getting yourself, it's I suppose like a sports person, except please don't make me run. It's a sports person that's so prepared. They've got the equipment ready. They are prepared. Their muscles know what needs to happen. Even though the context might change of the, might talk to, that's like weather on the day of a race. My weather can change, but the readiness of my body and my brain, as long as I make it present, it can flow. And actually, one of the key parts is really surprising. People don't know this, but to be an artist is to have restrictions. It's to have those parameters in place because you've got rules, and not necessarily obvious rules, but ones that help you stick to your own style and your own way of processing. And that makes decision making so much quicker. And if you can create a really controlled space that you create from, that sounds counterintuitive to a creative, but it's not. That allows you to play more freely because there's not so many decisions, so you can't distract. And that's been a really interesting point of view this year.
I think that's fascinating. And it reminds me of other guests I've had on the show. So Neil Malarkey, who does improv comedy, was talking about the fact that, yes, improv is wild and crazy and goes where the hell you want.
Yeah.
But we don't run the entire thing like that. So the Comedy Store in London has people that, the people doing ticketing and advertising and the drinks and security and all those things. They're not crazy and wacky. They do their job so that we can then, when we're on stage, he was saying, do that piece. And I love this idea that you create constraints, because I think constraints actually is a good, we would think maximum freedom equals maximum creativity. But your point is we all need those constraints around us with limitations that force us to think differently. Because if you've got, as you say, if you had 500 pens, make a ridiculous thing, 500 pens, you're like, oh, what do I do? So you've narrowed it down, which means that you're not wasting time or energy thinking about too much about which one you're using. You're just grabbing what's there. And I guess you're constrained by the size of the paper that's in front of you.
Definitely.
And so I love this idea that to get the creative bits and to get the flow, you've controlled the environment. So it's, as you say, it feels really counterintuitive, which is like, here's a freewheeling artist doing things, but you've built a workflow, if you like, that allows you to do that within the time. And I guess time is another constraint. So all of that means that you're really, I guess, getting the best out of yourself, right? It's really, it's allowing those creative juices to flow because you've dealt with all the other things that might be potential distractions.
Definitely. I love what you picked up on there. Something that helps me in my daily life, actually, if for anyone that is listening and has anxiety in their lives or a sense of sort of spiraling sometimes, which we can all feel, it's this idea of what can you control? Control the controllables and let the rest just do what it does. And that, to me, whenever I go sort of that brain space, just come back to that. What can you control? And I think that's really informed my practice of the work. What can I control? I can control, like you said, the time, the board, the pens, and actually something more ephemeral, which is how I turn up. How do I interact? What's my sense of being? What's my energy? And how do I connect with other people? What's the decision I make on that day? Is it, I'm going to turn up as happy-go-lucky Hanny? Happy Hanny? Or is it going to be a professional, serious Hannah? And it's not saying that I have to be all or nothing that, but just allowing myself to be present in that version of me. And also, something that I'm really practicing this year is acknowledging there's different versions of me as well. Not having to pretend. If I really feel I've got the energy to be that extroverted person on the day, turn up as that, but just know that the day after, you're not going to have as many beans because it's that energy flow. I really do believe in how we share and connect. And actually, something else you said there about the size of the board, so the paper or the board that I'm drawing onto, one question I get asked all the time is a corker at this point is, how do you not run out of space? How do you know where it's going to go?
Uh,
End up having to put little post-it notes on the end.
it's just like just going, oh shit. Right. Oh my God. I didn't realize it was an all day event. I thought it was like an hour, and now I'm like,
It also makes me laugh that 'cause people come to me with the funniest question, and I know it comes from a good place because they're so intrigued.
right,
It's like, "What are you doing?" But they look at me and they project themselves onto me. So they think
right.
that I am also a middle manager or a leader that has however many people to look after, and this is like the wildest side gig they've ever seen in their lives. It is no, this is a this takes a lot of skill and a lot of practice. And I truly believe, actually, something else you said, I think you said something about not enjoying art or not feeling comfortable with drawing or something like that. Not true. Everyone it's so subjective. There is no good art, bad art. There's just creating. I genuinely believe that. What is different with live scribing is that it's got to make sense. Because if someone's buying a an illustrated piece, it's got to be the information that they're talking about. I can't just. We said this on the night, didn't we? I went bored halfway through and just draw a big shit. Like, and that was shit with a pin.
I just, well, yeah, well, like, I didn't know, like you're not concentrating and you were dreaming about your holidays or something, right? And suddenly you draw a picture of I don't know, skiing or something,
Yeah.
right? So yeah.
Well, yeah, so there is when someone says to me, "Oh, I can't even draw a stick man." Yeah, in art that's fine because you can draw whatever you want. But yeah, in live scribing, it's got to make a little bit of sense. People have got to recognize because they're visual metaphors. That's you're picking up on metaphors that people recognize, and that's where you can remove some of the words because the picture is so iconic to not in skill or style, but so iconic in recognizing that. And actually going back to the size of the board and knowing how much space to use. I use a technique called time chunking. So if I know that the event is 6 hours long, and which make it really simple, the board is 60 centimeters long. That's where I can start to go this chunk, this chunk. Where it gets interesting is events where parts are not necessarily more important, but more time heavy, or they've got a panel events and there's going to be more content coming out of that section. That's when my creativity gets to have a little bit of fun and think, oh, we're going to have to try and use shapes and borders and titles to really distinctly show where parts exist and what's separate and what's informing what and how the page moves. I really enjoy that part of it actually, because cannot overdo it. If you try and prescribe, you can't keep with the flow. You almost own it too much. And the interesting part is that it's never mine to own. I am, I think, like you said, a conduit, the information to the board. I'm purely capturing the information. And I always say this to clients that the quality of the information is always what's going to make a quality output. Realistic, I'm turning up with my skill set. If it's a brilliant piece at the end, it's the brilliant information that has inspired me to create it. And the piece at the end is always for the client. That's for them to keep. And then they'll have a digitized version as well. So really, I feel like a custodian of the information. I know that sounds so grandiose, but it's a custodian. I'm trusted to capture someone's story and their journey. And that is an incredible privilege. I love that part.
It's really interesting to hear you talk about the exercise, because another constraint is clearly it's going to be used by someone else. And what I think is interesting about it is yes, it has to look beautiful, right? You could produce something that was an accurate, or you could produce something that looked like a set of minutes, right? Which like no one's going to pay you for that, because you still go, well, that's not real. So so that there's an element that it has to look good.
Yes.
But there's an element that it also has to be useful. And it really struck me that when I look at the challenges, and I suspect you'll turn around to me and say, these are constraints and therefore that's helpful in a way because it drives where is you don't have complete artistic freedom, right? Because you might think, oh, that's really interesting, but you've got to be pegged back a little bit to what that client is looking for. So as I was, and I hadn't thought about it as commissioning a piece of art,
Mm.
but that's what it is, right? Is it sort of at the end you will get what the product that you get is a piece of art that's there that serves a very specific, I guess several purposes, but it's to remind you of the event. So there's a postcard element, if you like, a sort of, or a photo, but there's also a here's what we talked about and a thought provoker as well. And so you've really got to deliver on that. And so it's interesting from an artistic perspective because normally if you commission an artist, you give them a steer about what you'd like. But very often the artist will go, I'll bloody do what I, but particularly the more famous one is you will have what you're given type thing, right?
Definitely.
You wouldn't, it's like I always sort of talk about, if you hired Elton John, you don't get necessarily to tell him what to play,
Yes.
right? He's going to play the playlist because that's what you find. And so what I think is interesting about you is this fact that there's a purpose for it, which isn't just to look nice. You also have to get that communication piece. And so is my thesis right? That's just a constraint that you work with that allows you to do it. If that wasn't there, you'd have far too much freedom and couldn't produce the powerful messages that come out of your art.
Yeah, I think you've nailed it there. I'm actually working with quite a big retail brand tomorrow, and they don't have brand guidelines. And that is a red flag for me. So I'm thinking, how on earth, you're a fashion retail brand. How do you not have? But like you say, give them, and do you know what's really funny? They gave that piece of information to me as a gift. Like,
Right.
you get to choose. Like, you'll get to just run with it, whatever you want. And to me, I think because that's not how I work, it was like, I don't what am I going to do then? Because I've lost one of my constraints.
Right.
Which sounds quite masochistic, really, doesn't it? But
that's interesting because again, the environment that you're in is, if I think about how I imagine, based on what I've seen, and I've not one, but how I imagine artists operate is you sort of do it when you're in the zone and when you feel like it. And what's interesting about what you do is you are told where to do it,
yes,
when to do. It's not like you can kind of go, actually, I'm not really a morning person, so can we start at 12? Right. So you've got these sorts of things on you. And the more I hear you talk, the more it makes perfect sense to me that actually that's far from creating stress, that's removing stress. And so I love this idea of somebody that works in an office/retail environment is kind of going, well, we'll bring the art, got the artist coming in, let's make her life easy. We'll meet her with, this is great. And you're like, oh
crying.
God. Like, yeah.
Do you know what you're saying though is so interesting? It's a point of contention that's followed me for almost 5 years since starting Scribble Inc. And that contention is my identity being split between a business owner and an artist, and never feeling like I fully belong in either. Now,
Okay.
this is a really ego-driven thought and something I've had to practice very consciously, because otherwise it would just rip me in half. But I've got friends who, so I obviously went to art school. I have friends who are incredibly talented, and I'd attend events with them and personally put this on myself, label myself as not a real illustrator. So when they introduce me, they'd go, oh, what do you do? I'd feel so much shame and guilt about saying I'm an illustrator because I'd be so terrified they'd find out that I work with corporate clients. And then in the business world, I'd feel like when I met and networked and had to present my business, that they wouldn't take me seriously because I'm an artist. But never did I allow myself to fully own either. And it was only through a leadership team event that I did. So working with AstraZeneca, actually, they do a brilliant leadership program and some of the most incredible coaches I've ever worked with. And I was illustrating their journey, this 16-week journey from start to end. And I learned so much from them doing this journey. And one of the quotes was that there's no point in trying to fit in to one category or another, because the definition of fitting in is not belonging. If you can authentically show up, I actually think that's a Brené Brown about not fitting in. But the other thing was that they said to us is it's about, I wasn't I wasn't on the program, I was illustrating the program.
But you effectively were, right? Because you're paying attention. And you might say that you might not be participating in group exercises in the same way, but you are in many respects, I think it's interesting because when you're participating in an event, you are having to
Oh,
listen. And so if you're the average attendee at a conference or an event, you can switch off, but you can't do that. So I wonder whether
I'm
actually to
absorbed.
say yes, of course, you're not formally a participant,
Yeah.
but you kind of have to be an Uber
Yeah.
participant
Well,
to pay attention.
on average, I'll attend between 200 and 250 conferences a year as a scribe, as an
Wow.
illustrator. So I am constantly, and this is what when someone says to me, "No, we're quite in like our industry has a lot of complex information. Are you sure you're going to understand it?" I'm like, "No." How many conferences have you been to this year? And but this is why I always have a discovery call with the client first, because sometimes it really gets you. And the all their life, just the language they use, and it's really confusing. But going back to it's this idea that we are a balance board as people, as for our interests, our hobbies, our skills. We are not one thing or another. That's so archaic and unhelpful to think that you're only prescribed to be one thing for your life. And part of being a niche business is making sure that there's still variety in there so you don't get bored and stuck and you can keep learning and adapting. But I have to remember that consciously. We are a balance board. We can tilt and we can shift. And that's brilliant that we can do that, because otherwise you will get stuck. And then who can you help? It's you know.
I love this idea of that. And I was going to say creative tension. I don't mean just because it's a better phrase than tension, right? But I love this idea of the Venn diagram. And you're in that intersect between art and business.
Mm,
And you're not in the business of selling art. The art is the business and the business is the art. And so I love that because for me, where you get those intersects, I think interesting things happen.
yes.
And that's where, there's different forms of inspiration. And so in many respects, that discomfort that you feel and the sense of belonging is kind of because you're challenging and it's almost where the tectonic plates are meeting and maybe they don't meet. And so that's where I think interesting cognitive processes take place.
Yeah.
And I completely recognize what you're talking about in slightly different way because my business is looking on the one hand behavioral stuff, on the other hand it's kind of compliance
Mm,
sort of seriously thing and rules and so I sit in that and I think there's a lot to be gained by treading into those spaces and almost the discomfort is the thing, right? That's why, because if that discomfort didn't exist, loads of other people would be doing what you're
yes.
doing because it'd be easy. But two, I think that's it, again, it's you having to react to something and so I totally understand the kind of I don't feel like I belong anywhere, but I think it's beautiful. It's your space.
Yes.
And that's why I love the way you talk about it because to what feels like tensions, everybody I would sort of look at it and go, I think you belong in both, right? And neither.
Yes.
And I love that. And I think that's great because that's Hannah's space
Mm,
and who cares where the lines are. And so it almost seems to me for you to be able to do what you do and have the business that you have, it needs to feel slightly weird and slightly awkward and slightly unorthodox and not quite fitting
yeah.
because that's where the magic happens.
Definitely. And a sort of manifestation of that is like some people might think this is really benign and boring, but for me, it's what I wear. So when I turn up to a corporate event, am I expected to be in formal sort of office wear? And it's this whole,
Right.
and then it's the sense of self. It's well, no, because I'm not one of the team. I'm an external. And then do I show that in my regalia? Do I then turn up in like really odd things? So people are like, oh, she's the weird one. She's the
Right.
evil
The crazy artist is
one."
shown.
And that's actually something that I'm only starting to notice now. I got so caught up in the corporate world that only now I'm going, no, I can turn up however I feel comfortable. And when I'm comfortable, I will show up as my best self and I can be more present. And I think that's just taken a bit of maturity to realize that. Before, I always had to play into the role. And now I can authentically turn up. And I don't know whether that speaks to imposter syndrome, this idea that we have to pretend to, and maybe again, perpetuating the idea that you have to show up as something to be respected as something. I don't know, but yeah, in how I dress, I find a really interesting balance. And I think that's as I said, a manifestation of which world do I live in, and othering and belonging. Um, just a side note, really, that was. But and maybe it's shifting as well. I don't know, as we've gone hybrid,
Yeah.
as the younger workforce are coming through. I've definitely like my dad doesn't wear suits anymore. That's for sure. Um, and whether that expectation will change, I don't know.
And I think what's interesting here is that there's no, because again, it's the human thing, right? There's no right answer.
Yeah.
Because you could have it all worked out. Go, right, this is one where I need to wear a suit, right? Whatever, right? And they would constrict you, and you would, right? And people go, why is she wearing a suit? We've hired the artist.
Yes.
On the other hand, you could go, this is a professional event. Why is she turning up looking like some sort of, tramp on a beach?
Yeah.
And it's like, well, just I don't think there's the right answer there. And I think that's just really, it speaks, I think, a lot to your thoughtfulness and paying attention, because in a lot of what you're doing is you're making sense of massive complicated issues, and you're pulling out salient points.
Yeah.
And so, what you have clocked, I might not have picked up. And even when you summarize my presentation, I was like, it's not that I didn't recognize it, right? But it was like, oh, that's interesting that those were the bits that resonated for you. And so I thought it was a really powerful mirror that was there. And your job is to represent what you see and feel. So there isn't a right answer. And my guess is, if anybody kind of came to you beforehand and said, right, Hannah, the key bits of my present, I'm going to give you the key bullet points, right? That seems to me would be anathema to what you do.
Yeah.
And it would be almost like, well, I'm not going to do that, right? And it would like, I'm going to, I'll reject those, because it's what matters here is what I think, because I guess because of the natural flow of the process, right? You can't have these so we talk about constraints, but there's a type of constraint you wouldn't want, which would be I'll just give you the bullet points that you need to draw,
Yes.
and that's how we'll have things. Kind of like it was a sort of, propaganda message. And what we say, I don't know, to pick a hypothetical example, politicians that wang on and on and on about sort of the things that they do, speaking human.
Yeah.
In the same way, if someone were to try and direct you, that would be missing the point of having you there, because it's not
100%.
about you being steered. It's like, how do we get the best out of you? How do we get your lens and observation on the
Yes.
world?
And you lose the magic. The magic is in the present, the now, the live. And if you've tried to prescribe to me, it's almost like you've tried to bypass the journey. And like you said, it's why would they, what are they trying to hide, or what are they scared of that's going to get picked up? And realistically, like you said, I have a lot of speakers come to me at the end and say very similar things to you of, gosh, I've never seen my talk represented like this. And it's in that tone. It's never, oh, I didn't want to see it like this. It was I've never thought that could possibly be interpreted that way. And now I've got a new perspective of myself. And I think actually, more than anything, that it speaks to the person who's coming up to me. If you're having a mirror held up to you and you're uncomfortable with what you see, that says more about you.
Right.
And I love doing this with teams who are trying to work through a best practice strategy, or trying to write and values together as a team. And they're not on the same page, because once I've illustrated something and they can see it and they go, that's not what I thought we were talking about at all. And someone else goes, that's exactly what we're talking about. That's when you can start to say, right, we've been talking about different things this whole time. Hannah, draw up this one, draw up that one. That's where we're different. It's almost like counseling, actually. Those ones, they get spicy.
But it struck me as you were talking, right? The word, I'd never thought about this, but the word prescribe. If we break that up, that's literally telling the scribe what to write.
Yeah, which is
And I think that's quite interesting in your context, right? Is that's not, it doesn't, you're not a prescribed thing, right?
Yes.
You're scribing. And I think that's a really, I'd never thought about the derivation, but I think that's interesting is
that.
we getting you're writing it's not neutral, because you're coming with, but it's an independent
Yes.
perspective on what's happening. And if somebody tries to prescribe,
Yeah.
that's not you. That's impeding you from doing your job.
I 100% agree. I've never thought of it like that.
No, I hadn't.
I'm going to use that. Thank you. I'm going to refer to Christian Hunt after. What? Any problems, mate?
Is this something? Can you switch this off? Because you talked about sort of automatisms and
Yeah.
processes. Are you like, I don't know, if you're sat on a train, right? And not that you'd be listening. Imagine somebody's having a
Oh
conversation
no,
on the
I've
train, you
done
can't
that.
help but hear it, or something's going on. Are you like tempted to write it down? Is it formulating? Like, is this a lens through which you view everything going on in the world, or is it something you switch on?
I'd say a spectrum rather than an off and on. It's a dial. And actually, I have drawn a very funny conversation on the train. Someone was on the phone and I couldn't help it. I just had to share it on Instagram. So I live drew it and you could hear the girl in the background. It was, I haven't done it since because I felt so bad after it, but it was so funny. And actually, I draw, I think I would just let that all sink.
No, but it's like I'm sorry, if you're having a conversation in public space,
Like,
then it's public space, right? You can't expect
yeah.
other people not to listen, because if you don't want them to listen, don't have it in a public space.
Yeah, absolutely. But and this is the thing, there are almost like, electricity, so lightning forks in my life that control the energy. And there's three main places where that happens. It's when I'm falling asleep, when I'm in the shower, and when I'm on a train. Three of the, and my brain just loves that. That is perfect. I don't know whether it's the chemicals going on or the environment, the movement. Um, but it helps me distill my thoughts. And I will use my notebook. I always carry my fountain pen, like old school, and a proper notebook. And if I've got really heavy things on my mind, I'll draw them. And it's not like I'm listening to anyone externally, but I'm listening to myself. I'm getting internal and I'm writing it down on the page. And what I found is with my partner, if I'm getting really irrational, he'll be like, let me look in that notebook. And what I've
Oh.
done is everything that I've been worried about, I've put in there. So then he can look through it and go, right, let's talk about this. That you need to, because I think one step is writing it down, the next step is verbalizing it,
Mhm.
make it able to release it from your body, like energy, get it out. So he's brilliant at that. He'll start to notice when I'm sort of storing energy, bad, unhelpful, not necessarily bad, wrong choice of words there, unhelpful energy. Um, and I'll just sort of show him what I've been drawing. And he'll go, yeah, I heard you talk like overstimulated on the tube. See, and you forgot your headphones. And it's so funny. And what I think it speaks to is I've practiced so hard with my drawing that's my communication style, that my verbal style is almost like 5 years behind. So if I try and communicate something that's just popped in my head, it comes out in this jumble of thoughts and rabbit holes and, oh, that was exciting. And then do you remember that? Oh, actually, no, let's go back to that. We've probably done it about 4 times in this conversation. But if you get me to draw it, it will be concise and it will be clear and it'll be organized. And it's a really interesting, especially when you get into a relationship and you live with someone and you just have to keep showing them a notebook every so often. I'm really sorry, this has been concerning me recently and I don't know how to verbalize it. That is my life. So there's definitely, there's swings and roundabouts to it, but is that spectrum could always draw something, or it can. It's whether it's conducive. For me, it's always purpose driven. So purpose with the client is to get something out on paper. Purpose with my notebook is to get something out on my head. Purpose with drawing is to find flow and practice. If it was just, and the person on the train, I was just really bored. So find purpose is to just draw something funny. If it hasn't really got that behind meaning, then I'll see it in my head. I'll see the visual, but I won't
Right.
expend the energy of drawing it.
Okay. No, because I just had visions of you literally going, "Need another notebook," right? Because I've just been on a long train journey. It's just got
Oh, it's
just over.
bad week.
Right. But I love this idea of having an outlet, because I'm always struck when I'm communicating in a language that I speak less well than English,
Yeah.
that
Go off.
you sometimes run out of vocabulary.
Right.
And so situations that one feels comfortable in English, particularly confrontational ones, right? Where I'm demanding something or trying to make something happen. and where you really need the right words to be able to point that and arguing your case or just not necessarily in an aggressive way, but just trying to make something happen. And the vocab fails you. And that's really disempowering. And it's always struck me that the power of being able to write and speak and oracy be the oral example, but I guess drawing is one of you is something we all need of.
Mm.
And I see lots of people disenfranchised in society because they don't have the wherewithal in the loosest possible sense to express themselves. They've not been taught how to do it. They've not been encouraged to do it. And so I'm very lucky in that I have an ability to communicate. I had a very good education and I've got the wherewithal to carry a crowd. But
Mm.
it's when I find myself in those situations that I suddenly see what it must be like for people who haven't had an education, maybe people who are illiterate. And so I love this idea that you've got a mechanism to put it down that's not a mechanism that I see as available to me, although I will take this as an encouragement to try scribbling and drawing. And I've actually bought one of those tablets just because I love note
Oh, yeah.
taking, just to play with it a bit, and in part because I think digital allows me to wipe things out and just play with it a little bit more and erase things in a way that I struggle to do in the physical world. But this idea that we need an outlet and some way of getting things out. And I think when people get disenfranchised in society, disaffected youth that go and do silly things because they don't feel listened to.
Oh,
And sometimes it's that they don't have a voice and they don't feel heard. And so I love this idea that you found something that works for you. There's a place to park feelings and emotions and thoughts
yeah.
that gets them out. And I love this idea of kind of like leaving your body. And so you can move on. And I think that's really interesting.
Definitely. It's part of, I think, coming back to that idea of Scribble Inc, INC, rather than INK, it's incorporating. It's how do we invite and encourage people into a conversation where there are so often barriers. Like you say, the language, the technical, the jargon, the confusing. And part of what I love doing is breaking down those barriers using visual means where people can understand, when they can feel like they can ask questions, because maybe there's multiple ways of interpreting it and they can say, oh, I saw it like this. And someone else can go, oh, I know I did it like this. And part where that was really prominent, actually, in my experience, was starting out with the cybersecurity company when I was a student. Before Scribble, I was 19. I'd been selected to go and help this cybersecurity company, brilliant company. And the founder, the manager, Paul Omar, this brilliant leader, he really showed me what an inspirational leader looks like. He was so invested in using visuals to help people understand what was going on in that world because it was so hard to get into it. And especially me, 19-year-old girl from Shropshire, I've never even heard of cybersecurity, I don't think. How do you need that to look after your sheep? So it was huge for me. And I got a seat round the table and I never thought I'd be invited to do that. And he was the one that put it right down there in the middle. And, Helen needs to be here so we can all understand this program better, so we can all be on the same page. And that is just unbelievable leadership skills, to trust and to give me the empowerment to be there. And I think that totally speaks to what you're saying. People who don't feel, who not just don't feel, who are not given that opportunity. If I can then, from my place of working with bigger clients, start to help people understand what goes on inside those rooms and share the knowledge and get it out and get people interested in it as well, not just create a 20-page document. It's a 1-page visual. And they'll look at it and go, didn't know they talked about that. Or I've got expertise there. I wonder if I could help them. Or even just learning something new. That to me is so exciting and I still see myself sometimes as the little Shropshire girl that's going into like Forbes, to do these huge drawings. And it's like you say, it's not a mural, it's content, it's learning, it's years of experience that I'm privy to now. I kind of feel like maybe it's me being a young female business owner, that it's my prerogative, it's actually my duty to send the lift back down to whoever wants to come up next and just make sure that it's an open door. Yeah, I had to knock on a few more. But if the next person doesn't need to do all of that, surely we're going to progress as a race, as a human race, way quicker. If people are invited to talk and invited into spaces for diversity of thinking, that to me is a winner. Surely that's the biggest win we could have.
Right. I love this idea of driving inclusion in discussions about things, because as you were talking, I was having flashbacks, and I'm not someone that's generally, from person, like I've got the full, I can, I'm not scared of these things. I can make my voice heard.
Yeah.
Sometimes possibly make my voice heard when it shouldn't be. But even I have felt in situations where you're the spare part in the meeting. You're not allowed to say anything.
Mm.
You don't have anything to contribute. Views aren't asked for. It's kind of just, like almost like Victorian children, just sort of sit there and don't say anything. And I love this idea of what you're doing, and the whole thing that you're about. And the beautiful thing is when I try and if you are the business,
Yeah.
right? So this is in a way, you can't scale this business. I mean, you can find digital ways of doing things, but it's you.
Mm.
And so if I'm hiring your business, I'm hiring you,
Yeah.
because I've had this discussion about my own business. It's kind of like this human risk thing, and it's like, well, I can't just bring, like, if people are hiring the company, I should stop pretending there's a difference between the two, because it's all about me, and I put my and I love that idea for the whole piece is your perspective and your views and bringing things in. And so this idea that you're kind of opening up and bringing another human perspective precisely because of your experiences and your skills, I think it's a really interesting human way of solving a problem.
Mm.
Because often what we do is we build structures
Yeah.
to solve, right? So we want more people to speak up. So we scream at them, go, "You must speak up," right? And we'll build, here's a whistleblowing hotline, right? And then you tell people off when they don't come forward. We don't think about that human thing. And I love this idea of and it is totally authentic to the business. That's what I love as well. It's not like you've kind of gone, I have a superpower and I will use this superpower to, I don't know, encourage children into child labor, right? Something really bad, right? You're using it for really, and there's a driving force behind what you do. And so I love this idea that you're solving a human challenge, which is how do we get more people involved in something, and how do we allow people to be themselves and speak up through a very human mechanism. And I think that has to come from the fact that your business is run as you, right? Is when the brand speaks, it's you talking. When your output is very much your voice out there. And so I think all of that's really, really interesting, and points to, it's all very consistent and nicely human.
Oh, thank you, Christian. Thank you. It's an interest. I get it a lot, especially from people in larger organizations who pose the same question with a very different motive of how could you possibly grow the business if it's just you? And it, and it's like, wow, if you really lost that inner child that badly, if you really lost that, there's no sense of human belonging, that you're part of something bigger than yourself. But
Yeah.
yeah, I could hire a bunch of other illustrators, and there are agencies that do what I do, but not me. I thank you for recognizing it, because it's been a really tough decision that how do I grow the business? And I've consciously decided, that I grow my business by working with my clients on a deeper, broader basis, that there's more purpose behind what we do, that there's more personality and there's more connection. That to me is growth, not just one event and done. It's a project. It's how do we create something meaningful and long lasting? That is growth. And so it's almost 5 years. Scribble will be 5 in November, which is crazy.
Wow.
That I've been able to bring on board people who are better at things than me. So I now have a business associate who organizes me and organizes my emails and life, really. She looks after things because she's brilliant at that. And then I do have an illustrator who I contract in who is brilliant. She's autistic and she has this fantastic way of synthesizing the information that's written. So not necessarily spoken, but written information. She can look at it and use frameworks. It's fantastic. And I'm not as good at her. I'm not as good at that as her. And then obviously outsourcing whatever financy stuff, because artist, lol. And so that is growth to me as well. The fact that I can employ people is huge. That
Right.
what I'm adopting is that growth is not just amount of people and amount of money. Growth is purpose driven. It's why. What is this growth for? Why? What are we going to do with it? Because you can earn and earn and earn, but that doesn't bring happiness or contentment or alignment. And I don't want to make that mistake too late.
Right.
At year 5, I think that's quite a nice point to start really. And I don't think I've ever not done that, but it's definitely conscious. It's right at the forefront of my thinking now. So every piece of content I create, every business I work with, it's we align. I'm excited. And it's this, I always check in. I want to see if any of the listeners do this as well. But when something comes in, when an inquiry comes in, if that initial feeling is expansive and exciting, and even if it's nervous, if it's that growing feeling, that's a hell yes. If it's an inquiry comes in and it's like, oh God, that sounds like hell, and it's everything shrinking, my shoulders are coming forward, and oh my God, I can't, how would I even start to do that? That's got to be a hell no.
Mm-hmm.
And when the more you start to align yourself to those and give time, your time that's the thing that you can't get back. So it's a horrible feeling as a business owner to say no to money because you're running a business. But if you're saying no because you know that's not the right fit, only good things can come from that. And I truly believe it. That's my three big behaviors: optimism, curiosity, naivety. It's got to be. At 22, I wasn't naive enough to think, oh yeah, I'll start a business, lol. Then this never would have happened.
Right.
Naivety is a cornerstone of Scribble.
I love all of that. And I particularly like this idea of, and I always think about like Spider-Man's spidey senses, which is that kind of sixth sense thing where you just go, oh no, there's something not quite right here. And it's fascinating when you talk about that, because I think this is something that anybody starting a business, you go through at some level, which is there's that dash for cash, right? And any opportunity to make, this is great. Someone wants to hire me, awesome, right? And so you chase all those things. And then you kind of know when it's, and I don't mean grubby money in the sense of people you shouldn't be working with. I just literally mean awful money in the sense of bloody, that was terrible. I didn't enjoy it. Wasn't fulfilling. I wasn't helping. That didn't stack up. And I've got to the stage of sabotage now, where if I have that sense, I will make it not happen. And that might be putting the price up. That might be kind of making it clear that I won't do whatever. And of course, sometimes playing hard to get makes it harder. But I agree with you. I think it's really, really important when your business is driven from the heart and from the soul and the passion. That on the one hand, to take that person that was asking about scaling your business, right? That's a very logical sort of computational thing about, well, how are you going to make this thing? But I think if your business is driven from the heart, you can start to use that emotional intelligence and that kind of sixth sense to be a guiding light for the business. And if you're not building a massive empire, you don't necessarily have to document it, right? You don't have to have 500 things because you're not having to explain it to anyone else. You're just going, doesn't feel right to me. And I don't even need to know why. I just know that we're not doing that. Whereas if you were to hire an army of people, you'd have to codify that.
Yes.
And I think that's really hard because sometimes it's just like, I don't know. It's just, there's something about this that I can retrospectively create criteria that fit that business, but I wouldn't want that necessarily to be like, and I want to be, hypocritical is probably the wrong word, but I want to be inconsistent. And I want to sort of, something feels right at one moment and maybe the same thing doesn't feel right with different people or a different moment.
Correct.
And I think that's really interesting when you talk about it, to have that, the comfort of doing it. And I agree with you, because the more you double down on being you, particularly where your business is you, the more successful you'll be. Because it'll alienate a ton of people, but they're not people you want to have anyway.
Exactly. I think you nailed it there. For me, it's flexibility and adaptability. It's what helped me survive COVID. In fact, this 2021, last year of COVID, was my most lucrative year, which is just ridiculous. I'm an events business.
Profiteering out of the pandemic.
I'm a solo-owned female business, Christian. The first year of COVID was terrifying. It really was terrifying. But the second year, I feel like I'd adapted, I'd gotten clearer on what I wanted, and actually doing that has helped me become a hybrid business now. So rather than just live on-site events, I can support clients with digital events, remote events, digital on-site events. Yeah, sometimes you get thrown spanners so that you can, I don't know where I was going with that analogy. Tighten.
No, it's good, but think it comes back to stuff that's natural, right? And so if we look at it's an even you've evolved your business in a natural way, and I think that's the way the planet evolves
Right.
and plants evolve and what. And so I like this idea of sort of just adaptation. And the reason you survive, to use a sort of Darwinian lens on this, is that you've adapted, right? You've adapted to fit
Yeah.
the circumstances, and so that's being true to yourself, and you haven't thrown everything out in an inauthentic way and just gone, I'll do, it's like what feels right at the time.
Yes.
And so you screw some things up and you learn, all that stuff, but that's natural evolution. And I think that's really, again, like it's massively on brand because it's you're doing what feels right to you and reacting to the scenarios.
Yeah.
And I think that's like it's commendable, but it's what you have to do because I think that's how your business is constructed.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an unconscious but reflection. It kind of shows that is if it's
And
authentic, it aligns.
yeah, and speaking of the unconscious, I mean, you when we first met, you and I had a conversation about what is going on in your head, in a nice conversation, I hasten to add, about your brain, and I wanted to just explore that because the question I asked you was around, like what processes are happening. Well, you've talked a little bit about the sense of energy and flow, but I wonder, have you ever like thought about, I don't know, sticking your head in an MRI scanner while it happens? Because I think that'd be fascinating to know what neurons are sparking and how much of it is, you've talked about being in flow. And I think this is a really interesting example of something that with your skills, it feels to you like it's just happening, but clearly there's some stuff sparked in the brain.
Yeah.
Have you ever thought about like just having some understanding of what's going on? What is actually sparking there? Is it as easy on you as it might feel? Or is that, I don't know, is that
This has got to be a public service announcement now. Anyone that's got a spare MRI, you can please welcome my brain in it because I can't.
with the body attached, we hasten to
Don't you know women can detach their heads and
right?
charge?
I had heard that,
Yeah,
right?
that's how we charge.
I'm not that familiar with the species, but I had heard.
Yeah, I would love to know. I'd be terrified. Who knows how my brain operates, but I think as part of a research project, that would be so interesting. If we can, especially going back to that idea of how I choose my energy and where it goes to in the focus of my arm drawing or my head listening or synthesizing, what lights up when, that would be so interesting. And I think it also, it firms up any claims that we make. So if we're trying to get more people to write, to draw and not use digital, go back to analog, if we can prove to them like this lights up when you're doing this, or this creates a firmer connection, or, neurons that fire together, wire together, if we can show that through my brain lighting up in different ways, that's another visual way of showing people what literally happens, not just me talking about it or a customer talking about the experience of seeing it, which is valid, 100% valid. Someone's felt experience of the process of seeing something illustrated in real time, that doesn't get diminished. But if we can add data to that and supporting as an interest, I think maybe it'll get more people involved because I do split opinion. It's not 50-50, but a small percentage of people just go, visuals aren't for me, because they will actually want something that's more, I don't know, factual, maybe. Maybe they're just boring. I don't know. Not my problem. But if we can speak to a wider population about the benefits and the effects, maybe we learn something new.
Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Wow. As I knew would happen, Hannah, time has just like flown past and we have covered like a ton of stuff and there's a ton more we could cover, but we'll leave that for future episodes and discussions amongst ourselves. But before I let you go, tell people how they can get hold of you if they want to see some of the examples of your work, hire you, where can people find you?
Thank you. Yes. So you can find me at Scribble Inc. Limited. That's Scribble Inc. Ltd. On Instagram, on LinkedIn. I'm Hannah Williams. You can find me on LinkedIn as well. I love that platform. So come and say hello. And any emails, you can also find the details on my site.
Brilliant. Well, there will be links to all of those things in the show notes, and I will put specific links. For example, the one that you did for my presentation, and also some of the other ones that have jumped out to me, and any that you think are particularly worth sharing, we'll also make sure that we tag in the show notes. But look, thank you. It was a real pleasure meeting you at that event that we were at. I loved what you've done, and I can see it at the corner of my eye at the moment as I talk to you here on the podcast. So it's what you have produced for me has stuck with me, and it's just been it's a wonderful thing to look at, brings memories, but also helps me think about things. And I know that it'll have the same impact for everybody else. You have an amazing skill. I know you think it's normal, but for the rest of us, it's a superpower. And I'm just thrilled that you got the opportunity and you've created the opportunity for yourself to be able to use that, because I think there are lots of people out there that have superpowers of some kind that we don't tap into. And you mentioned, someone you're working with that's autistic. I love the fact that we can find things for people to do that bring out the best in them. So this, for me, is not just a really interesting glimpse into Hannah's life and my thinking, but I think it's a really positive message for people that if you can find your niche, and you had the courage to do it early on, which is great as well. I think that's a really positive thing. So thank you, one, for the work that you do, two, for being an amazing guest on the show, but three, I think this has been generally inspirational and an awesome person to spend time with. Thank you.
Oh, Christian, you're the best. Thank you so much.
So that's it for this episode of the Human Risk Podcast. My enormous thanks to Hannah for appearing and to you for listening. To find out more about Hannah, her company Scribble Inc, and to see some examples of livescribe art that she produces, including the summary of my presentation at the Speak to the Human event, have a look in the show notes. There are links to all of those there. Also want to say huge thanks to Sarah Abrahamson of Etienne, who was the person that invited me to speak at the Speak to the Human event. And so the fact that this episode happened is down to her as well. If this is your first time listening to the Human Risk Podcast, welcome. You can subscribe wherever you get your quality audio content. It's available on all of the major podcasting platforms. To discover episodes that you might have missed, have a look at the show's website. It's humanriskpodcast.com. Now, if you enjoy the show and want to support it, one of the things that you can do is to leave a review on whichever platform you use to download it. It really, really does help because it raises the profile of the show. That gets us more listeners and allows me to continue to attract high-quality guests. This episode was the 249th of the show. So the next one, the 250th, is a rather special episode. And I've got an absolutely amazing guest for you that I'm thrilled was able to join me. That will be coming out very, very soon indeed. But in the meantime, stay safe. Remember that even if you think you have no artistic talents, maybe pick up a pen or pencil and see what happens. And thank you so much for listening.